Greetings, I am Brother Judah from the Congregation of Israel, a representative of the NMP, the Nazarene Messianic Party. We'd like to welcome you to our podcast, What is to be Done? Here we investigate geopolitical, historical, biblical, social, and other scientific content. We approach the Bible from a socio-political perspective. And again, we argue that is the appropriate way to approach the Bible because the Bible deals with nations, kingdoms, civilizations, societies, governments. In short, it deals with politics and social sciences. We recently had two discussions, one on the war in heaven, and we had another one entitled dealing with Abraham's seed. And sometimes when people hear these passages, heaven or Abraham, understandably, they default into the secular, traditional religious mode. The purpose of doing those discussions was to set a standard. It was to set a standard for our teachings. And setting this standard, as we say, we deal with the Bible from a socio-political perspective. We want to give a reference to look at certain passages, for example, the war in heaven, and our discussion on it was to show that it was to engage in political activism against powers of injustice. And then we followed up with discussing the body of people who are supposed to partake in that struggle, and this was the seed of Abraham. Now these are references. It's to be, for those who may listen, is to keep those in mind as we further expound on political and social and even scientific content. Today I would like to deal with a subject, and that is FBA'S, acronym for Foundational Black Americans, and the Gospel of Capitalism. FBA'S, Foundational Black Americans, and the Gospel of Capitalism, i.e. Mammon. Again, there's one of those words, gospel. Usually when people hear gospel, they default back into traditional secular religion when they hear gospel. But those, again, who fall into that is because they're not familiar with the historical context of biblical literature and the scene in which it was addressing, or should I say the time, historically. There was a gospel of Caesar. Gospel just simply means good news. Before the apostle Saul was speaking of the gospel of Jesus, the aristocratic Romans was spreading the gospel of Caesar. So gospel, again, is one of those words that's really not religious. Okay? It means the good news. And there has been gospel spread throughout history, and another gospel that have been spread to a disenfranchised people, a people trying to find their way, a people who have been laboring and struggling and fighting for decency. And might I add, not the only people, but the vast majority of the people on the globe have had this fight. And there has been a gospel that has risen up of capital. And that's what we want to look at as we begin to critique this message. You hear it often nowadays. I have heard it when I was growing up. It was spreading back in the 60s, 70s, and I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. Buy black, circulate the black dollar, gotta have black businesses. Even to the extent that the black capitalists have emboldened themselves even more so to go against one of the heroes of some black people. And that is Dr. Martin Luther King. And one of the reasons why is because in King early days, when he was first being baptized into social activism, he was running on a campaign of desegregation, primarily for the principle of human decency. But there's a lot of connections to that. You have to ask a lot of questions when you're looking at segregation and the deplorable conditions in which the people were in. So it's not just segregation wasn't the initial problem, but it was the problem of the lack of resources and the lack of decent resources for the people who were segregated. So these bring other problems. Okay, and people go back to slavery. Okay, and normally when people discuss slavery, they leave out something important. Slavery was initiated by feudal empires, and they crystallized into capitalist empires. And so eventually the slaver became the capitalist planter, which hopefully we can discuss him in the future. And what's so interesting is that capitalism is the doctrine of the world today, and people know very little about it. And so the FBA'S also know very little about it. And you ask the average person what is capital, and they simply think it is the money in their pockets. Not necessarily. If you have $100 in your pocket and you are using that $100 for a consumption fund, meaning buying food, paying for gas for your vehicle, going towards bills, it's not capital. Capital is wealth and resources that isn't needed for consumption. It's only needed for the production of more wealth. A type of system that originated in ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Babylon, and therefore the biblical writers begin to use it as a reference when they speak of Babylon the Great. It's a great commercial global system. But when we hear these words, we still think of religion. And so therefore our attempt is to show you we're looking at politics, and we have to get out of this mire of this Western religious, contemporary religious, traditional way of thinking. So let's begin our journey a bit, and hopefully we could begin to bring some clarity to some things. Foundational or FBA'S, Black Americans, and the gospel of capitalism. All right, so let's investigate this a bit and see what we can find, and hopefully be helpful to those who are searching for truths. Let's listen to something that Richard Nixon said. We're going to look at a clip of Richard Nixon. So we're going to begin. We're going to go back further, but we want to start with the 60s, late 60s, after the assassination of MLK and the growth of a new attitude towards an alternative economic system other than capitalism. Richard Nixon was one of the leaders of those of the United States, and he wanted to introduce the gospel of capitalism, and he understood he had an audience that will, encourage him in this. And we're going to look at them as well. We identify them today probably as the boule, the gatekeepers, or the black bourgeoisie. We have to talk about this. We have to analyze it. As I argue, they are some of the greatest enemies to the working class communities. But let's notice something that was brought to the FBA'S in the late 60s.
Black power seems to be shifting. Some aspects of black power are very disturbing to us because it means revolution. It means violence. But other aspects of black power are very constructive because it means that black people, they want to stand on their own feet. They want to have black banks and not just go to white banks. They want to have black businesses and not just go to the white businesses. And they should have, and they will have.
So Richard Nixon argued there was two scenes on the horizon in America. One scene was this aspect of black power that meant revolution. And then there was another scene of black power that wanted black business, black banks, black entrepreneurs. In short, black capitalist. Okay? And so we have a write-up, The National Response to Richard M. Nixon's Black Capitalism Initiative. And this was by Robert E. Weems, Jr. of the University of Missouri and Lewis A. Randolph from Ohio University. And this is making reference to the success of the domestic détente. Now, a détente refers to the easing of strained relations, particularly in a political context. So there was a détente going on globally because of the spread of the theories of radical revolutionaries who were socialists and communists. They were spearheading the decolonization process that was happening and helping in revolutionary struggles across Europe, Africa, South America, and Asia. The capitalists were losing ground, and therefore that they had to make recessions. And they sent forth a détente, which is something to mend relations. And this should be expounded on more too, because the method in doing it was to offer more prosperity to sufferers. And even though you can't offer prosperity to all the sufferers, but some, and these who receive some of the benefits, then they could be your running dogs and the defenders of those who's throwing them a bone. So Richard Nixon understood either revolution or concession. And this is his sentiment here. It's not that he really cared for the so-called FBA'S or anyone else in the working class. But as I told you, racism could become, that whole racist argument must be dissected, because it can very well become confusing. Because when you're looking at black power and black capitalists, every black person cannot be a capitalist. And so when you look at black capitalism, you're simply making reference to a small minority of black people who are going to open up businesses, and usually the person who's pitching the capitalist idea to you is because they're likely to be trying to open up a business. Buy black, circulate the black dollar. Yeah, I was on the tail end of that in my generation. I seen that the black businesses, the owners wind up moving out of the neighborhood. But on top of that, they just simply sold us the deplorable commodities in which the large-scale capitalists manufacture, which is another discussion. And so when we're looking at the black capitalist, he's no different than the white capitalist, because there's a small minority of white people who own the wealth, just like it was a small minority of black people who had wealth, and the masses of white people and the masses of black people, the working class, are in poverty or just above poverty. And it was back then in the 1960s as well. The vast majority of Europeans did not live that much above the poverty level. The poverty level of one individual in the 1960s was $1,500. Unless if you was over 65, it was about $1,400 annually. And so the annual income of $2,000 or under, which is not that far above $1,500 annually, the majority of white people did not make that much. Many of them were poor. So capitalism didn't work for them. When people say capitalism works, what do they mean? It has a long history of being omnicidal. It's destructive to the ecosystems, which will entail the water, the air, the land, people, species. It's omnicidal, totally destructive. What do you mean it works? Those are other discussions we're going to have. But this is what Nixon wanted to offer. So I ran my mouth a little bit. Let's play this again while we investigate exactly what's being brought to the table first.
Black power seems to be shifting. Some aspects of black power are very disturbing to us because it means revolution. It means violence. But other aspects of black power are very constructive because it means that black people they want to stand on their own feet.
Let me interject something here, and this is the sophistry of the idea. When you say revolution, black power means revolution, and then he said it means violence. Sometimes you can mend them two together. And every time one thinks of revolution, he thinks that violence is a necessary product of it. And that is absolutely not the case. Many successful revolutions were performed by non-violent action. It's a whole system behind it. And the American form of government is actually built to have a successful non-violent revolution, but the non-violent action revolution entails primarily the battle of ideas. It's a science. So revolution don't necessarily mean violence. Martin Luther King was killed because he began to understand the science behind non-violent action revolution. But for the listeners, Nixon must say that because they're going to equate the two. Just like now we talk about revolution, many people who may listen to this may think immediately of violence, like with warfare. That's why we like to reference you back to the teachings we have done thus far. That is the War in Heaven, and also the teachings on the seed of Abraham. So we had to catch that part, but we got to look into something in which he's introducing to us.
Black power seems to be shifting. Some aspects of black power are very disturbing to us because it means revolution. It means violence. But other aspects of black power are very constructive because it means that black people, they want to stand on their own feet. They want to have black banks and not just go to white banks. They want to have black businesses and not just go to the white businesses. And they should have, and they will have.
So they want to have black businesses. Now, let's look at this. The national response to Richard M. Nixon's Black Capitalism Initiative. Robert Weems and Lewis Randolph. It says Mr. M. Nixon viewed an uncontrolled black power movement as a major threat to the internal security of the United States during the 1960s and early 1970s. And this is the context of our teachings and our discussions we had on the podcast concerning Dr. Martin Luther King. And there's more to bring out about that. When we was looking through the FBI files and they said he was the greatest threat to national security. So this situation that was arising, Nixon wanted to address it. He was the next in line to sit in a seat of power. To address this situation, Nixon developed his Black Capitalism Initiative as a domestic version of his widely publicized foreign policy initiative of détente, which sought to contain the power of the Soviet Union and China. All right. The Nixon presidency offered African Americans the notion of black capitalism as an incentive to move away from the notion of violent revolution. To move away from the notion of violent revolution. This is what he wanted to present. And this is a perfect example of a battle of ideas. To undermine the black revolution, he didn't send soldiers in the streets necessarily, unless there was a riot. But the tactic wasn't to send soldiers in the street to crush the radical movement that was happening among black people. Violence was present, but primarily it was an ideological battle. This political maneuver Evidence suggests that although Nixon did not achieve his initial goals, which were the campaign promises related to black capitalism, he did indeed achieve his larger ideological goal of subverting African American radicalism. Ideological warfare, battle of ideas. This is a science we living in. We need knowledge. When I'm saying science, I'm talking knowledges of all sorts. We can't continue to move off of our emotions and not have knowledge. We have to practice sanity. Insanity is when we keep trying this and keep making these efforts that are obviously, as they have been tried, they have been a failure. But if we study and learn, we can understand anyway that they would have been a failure. Now, what I would like to do is begin to first lay the foundations of this discussion with simple definitions. But let us look further into this Nixon administration and this black capitalist overview. Mr. Weems and Mr. Randolph says, although the term black capitalism represented a skillful use of political rhetoric during the 1968 campaign, for his part, Nixon did take his campaign pledge seriously, and along with the Secretary of Commerce, Maurice Stans, sought to move black capitalism from the realm of rhetoric to reality. Beginning in fiscal year 1970, OMBE's, OMBE is simply the Office of Minority Business Enterprise, the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. This promotion and implementation of what came to be known as minority business set-asides assisted a growing number of African American entrepreneurs. Now, this according to the authors Weems and Randolph, because Nixon, according to them, they're saying because Nixon during his campaign had promoted black capitalism as a major remedy for America's racial ills, expectations regarding this initiative were extremely high. So this initiative and expectations of the remedy for solving the racial ills of America, or those people who had that mental problem, and many still have it today, there was a good news. There was a gospel that is to fix these racial ills. Expectations were high. And that gospel was the gospel of capitalism. And that's what Nixon said. Blacks need their own banks, right? They own businesses.
Aspects of black power are very disturbing to us because it means revolution. It means violence. But other aspects of black power are very constructive because it means that black people, they want to stand on their own feet. They want to have black banks and not just go to white banks. They want to have black businesses and not just go to the white businesses. And they should have, and they will have.
All right. He said they should and they will. This black capitalist initiative. This black capitalist initiative. What is capital? And what is capitalism? What is capital and what is capitalism? We got to find this out, all right? What is this? So here at the Nazarene Messianic Party, we argue that we are laying the foundations or building these study groups, and we consider ourselves the biblical school of global liberation for all oppressed people. And what is important for us today is for us to understand that we must consider the argument of breaking the shackles of capitalism. We must reflect on what Nixon and many others, white and black, have argued concerning the redemption of people. As I said, capitalism did not fix white people problem. More white people, the majority of white people were suffering just above, not too far in income above poverty levels. Asians, Latinos, wherever you go, the masses of the people are suffering from first feudalism, and it crystallized into this degenerate system we call capitalism. And it's being promoted to this day. But yet it has bear no fruits that will produce health and wellness, liberty, happiness, okay? And the pursuit of it. It have only produced thorns and thistles, suffering and destruction, but yet they say it works. Let's understand what it is. Let's understand what capitalism is first. Capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals or corporations own capital goods. What are these capital goods? That is factories. They own the factories. Now notice this. Raw materials. The means or tools of production. Now just consider the factory. You walk into a building. It has cement and concrete as foundations, metal studs or wooden studs to post walls and drywalls or drywall or plyboard, paint or steel beams. Think in terms of who owns the raw materials, who have the initial ores to smelt and to make steel beams, who have the access to the ores to make the metal for the metal studs, or have access to the sand and land that have the abundance of sand for usage to make windows, or the power, the lighting, the copper for the lighting to travel to illuminate the areas, the gas for heating, the natural resources to just even keep your place either air conditioned or heating in the winters or in the cool times. You need piping for that to run natural gas services. You need copper to run the wire lines. These are the raw materials. And the owners of these raw materials, you don't know their names unless you look for them. They're not on the news because they own the news stations. And it's a mandate you don't even mention their name. They own the material and the raw resources to build the factories. And then you have the capitalists under them who may purchase the factories. These are the smaller capitalists. They own the raw materials to transport your goods, whether it's through train or planes. They have the metals to make engine block. They have all of the resources, these capitalists. So thus, they use these resources to make factories or tools to produce. So capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals or corporations own these raw materials. So that means other definitions you may read. Capitalists are the people who, or individuals who have private ownership of non-private property, like forest, like thousands of acres of land just for capital, not for their usage, just for making more wealth. The individuals or corporations, which are individuals who come together to have joint ventures to produce wealth. They accumulate raw materials, and therefore they have the possession and ownership of factories and tools of production. The production of goods and services is then based on supply and demand in the general market, known as a market economy, rather than through central planning, known as a planned economy or command economy. The purest form of capitalism is free market or laissez-faire capitalism, where private individuals are unrestrained. Now I need you to understand this. See, people want to be capitalists, and then they complain when they are victims of this brutal system. And I tell people, I said, listen, you crying and complaining now to one another about capitalism and how prices is this and that and how it's hard to run a business. You want to add a moral standard to capitalism when capitalism has nothing to do with morals. It's like playing football and playing professional football or tackle football, and you upset because someone untackled you. You want to get in the ring and box, but all of a sudden now you want the other boxer to not be able to use both of his hands because he's at an advantage. No, you're stepping in the ring. He's going to use his skill to defeat you. You are his competition. And now you done got hit, got knocked all around the ring, knocked through the ropes, and you crying. Well, that's all a part of the game. You can't cry if that's a part of the game. That's the game you want. That's the game you promoted. Stop crying. It's like the young men who may put in work in the street. They get caught. They know taking a sit down is just a part of it. They're not crying about it. They said the person who's crying about it, then you're not about that life. You got caught, you take the sit down. That's just what it is because they signed up for it. I don't agree with that. I don't think they should have to do that for survival. But capitalism have created conditions where people are making these decisions and crashing out because they're trying to preserve their very life and live like human beings. But unrestrained capitalism, I want you to keep that in mind as we look at this here, because we're going to go back to Nixon Initiative and we're going to look at an economist, Andrew Bremer, He was among many rebuttals on why capitalism just won't work for black people. You don't have the raw materials. You don't have the factories. You don't possess them. Only way that those powers can be rearranged is through political power, acts of Congress, which you do have access to, but you don't know how to use it. You don't know how to get in there. You don't know how to organize and form your psychology where you must work together for the betterment of the entire community. Instead, you want just for yourself interests and your immediate circle. You pick up predatory practices, and this attitude is described biblically as the spirit of Cain, which is the possessor. It's also the same attitude is described through the personage of Balaam. Cain, Jezebel, imperialist practice. See, you heard the religious idea of Jezebel, but Jezebel is actually, she was the Hebrews would have understood as she was being made reference to, let's say in the book of Revelation. She was one of the first who began to take and steal land, where her being a prince or princess or female royalty from an empire in Phoenicia, she began to be married into the royal house of the Jews, and her practices implemented a form of eminent domain where the state not only took the national or family inheritance, but it also caused the man who overseeing the family inheritance to be arrested and put to death. The practices to rob and take people's land. See, this was the whoredom of Jezebel. Politically, Balaam was set out to curse the practice and the experiment of a 12 tribal confederacy who formed a federation, and their federal government was based on a constitution that would bring forth justice and equity and produce free men and women, free producers that isn't in subjection to hierarchy. Well, this was a terror to the kings and empires of the world. And instead of Balak and Balaam encouraging the practices that will cause justice to fill the world, they in turn wanted to curse that movement of social and economic redemption and equitable distribution. See, there's a political content behind these people. They're just not naming these people just to name them, to look at the character of the person per se as just someone in a storyline, but is to understand their historical and political context. And that's why we argue it's important to understand the text politically. And it is, something different than what a lot of people are used to. So Andrew Brimmer we're going to look at him, and he's going to explain why capitalism will not work, among many others who will argue will not work. It's just a form of exploitation. It will not benefit everyone, just like it didn't benefit all white people. But people make it seem like most white people had a bunch of money. That's like saying all Chinese know karate. You know, we don't want no one to label us. All black people like this. Well, stop saying all white folks got some money. The vast majority of white people don't have no money. They struggling. The vast majority of Asians struggling. Latinos, you name it. So this capitalism has not worked if we're looking at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all men. It miserably failed. And Nixon understood the failure of capitalism and the growth of the socialist and communist movements. And so in order to undermine it here in the United States, he introduced this gospel to the foundational black Americans and also the so-called foundational white Americans. The businessmen who control the media have done a good job informing the ideas of the masses of the workers to introduce this idea of the gospel of capitalism. And this system is the purest form of a free market laissez-faire system. People, don't cry when you become a victim. If you love it, if you want to participate, say it's all right. Don't say it's all right when you making money and then all of a sudden it's bad because you done got ran through the ringer. No. Cat is a professional fighter. He get knocked out. Boxing is boxing. Either you love it or you hate it. Don't all of a sudden now I'm boxing bad because you done got knocked through the ropes. But when you was world champion, everything on your way, you undefeated, everything good. Oh, now you done got knocked through the ropes and you on a losing streak. Well, boxing is boxing. You don't want to get knocked out. If you don't want to get hit, don't get in that ring. And it's the same thing here. Now, when you're looking at capitalism, especially the purest form, here private individuals are unrestrained in laissez-faire capitalism. They may determine where to invest, what to produce or sell, and at which prices to exchange goods and services. So the capitalists who own these resources, they possess the power of the prices, no matter what entrepreneurship you're talking. So Nixon wasn't introducing a rearrangement of the ownership of the means of production. It never came up in the conversation. Never. When you own the means of production, then you could determine where to invest and what to produce or sell, and at which prices to exchange goods and services. He said you should have black banks. Rockefeller have banks, but Rockefeller not a banker. He have banks. He control media. That family controls pharmaceutical industry, transportation. Who cares if you own a black bank? If you don't control the prices, you can have a black bank all you want to, but you can't determine the interest rate. The laissez-faire marketplace operates without checks or controls. In other words, Rockefeller, he loved laissez-faire. He'd crush all competition by any means necessary. Establishing monopolies, and then get these capitalists, get the smaller capitalists crying because they want a piece of the pie. No, man, we talking laissez-faire capitalism. Is that what you want? Is that what's being pushed to us? Now, looking at this context of the factories and raw materials, we look at this paper by Weems and Randolph, subtitle, Critics of Black Capitalism. Critics of Black Capitalism. Let's look and see what this would have been known in antiquity. Although the Nixon administration actively promoted black capitalism, economist Andrew Bremer, the period's highest-ranking African-American in government service, emerged as an outspoken critic of this initiative. In the May 1969 issue of Nation's Business, Bremer published a brief essay titled "The Trouble with Black Capitalism," which focused on racial desegregation's impact on black business. After citing Jim Crow, racial segregation contributed to the growth of black-owned service sector business. After citing Jim Crow, racial segregation contributed to the growth of black-owned service sector businesses. That's right, because as I said before, in which we want to show and prove the black capitalists, they made fortunes because they had a monopoly over the black consumer. The black consumer couldn't spend with no one else. So segregation was a terrible thing to them. They hated the segregationists or those who wanted to desegregation. You're messing up their business. But yet you have these black businesses and black men making money and wealth, where you go all the way back where some of them own slaves here on the mainland and the Caribbean islands. They black though. And that's where it gets messy. You can't identify by being black or white. You have black people who is your natural enemy because of their ideas. They do not care for you. They're only interested in you insofar as they can exploit you. Do they get a pass because they're your same color? That's insanity. So when we're looking at capitalism, I have made mention we're looking at chrematistics. And Bremer talks about the trouble with black capitalism. But I also want to introduce, before we look into Bremer more, let's understand what we're looking at here when we talk about capitalism. Okay, this economic system which private individuals and corporations own capital goods, okay, in factories and raw materials, the means and tools of production. The production of goods and services is then based on supply and demand in the general market, known as the market economy. So this idea about capitalism is to produce a market, and their capital is used to invest. And when they invest, their purpose is to make a profit by way of mercantilism or selling products, exchanging goods and services. That's what their factory is for. This is what the raw materials are for. They don't own a sugarcane plantation because they love sugarcane. The sugarcane plantation is to produce rum. It is to produce a commodity of sugar. They don't own orange orchards of fruits for their own consumption. It's an investment to sell. They don't buy up land to dig and mine the land because they want that iron ore to make the beams in the house in which they're living in. No, They possess all of this land, privately own it, and then sell that material to the toilers. So capital is wealth that is used to generate more wealth. And when we're looking at crematistics, Aristotle argued crematistics from crema, which is money, branch of political economy relating to the manipulation of property and wealth so as to maximize short-term monetary value to the owner. Now, it is compared to economics. Economics is the management of the household so as to increase use value to all members of the household over the long term. Economics is consumption. We have a farm because we're eating off the farm. Not that we have a farm and growing tomatoes because we're selling the tomatoes. All of them. It's not used for consumption at all. So crematistics become known as the art of money making and accumulating exchange values. That means making profits. Economic is the art of living and living well by using agriculture, crafts, hunting, and mining and commerce for the consumption of people, not necessarily to make a profit. So, economics is to satisfy a genuine need for the purpose of household management. Crematistics is to make money and accumulate possessions regarded as unnatural by Aristotle. You are accumulating these possessions, the materials, the raw materials, the land, the forest, only to accumulate more possessions. That's the spirit of Cain. That's Cain. That's what Jezebel did with her husband in the royal house of Judah. Balaam wanted to curse the social experiment that was to bring forth economics that will satisfy the genuine need. Their social system was, the intent of that social system was to satisfy the genuine need for the purpose of the household management. But the kings of the earth, the emperors, they accumulated much possessions that they didn't need. This is economics and crematistics. So in Greece, this idea of money making and the manipulation of property and wealth just to maximize profit, that's what the Greeks called crematistics. And Aristotle, way before Paul, he said that's unnatural. That's contrary to nature. And so you have Nixon introducing an unnatural schema, the gospel of capitalism or crematistics to the Black Americans, when it didn't even work for white Americans. It never worked for no one. It only benefited a small group, as it is to this day. We got to find out what this stuff is, what it means. If we don't understand what it means, we're lost. Just looking at this again. Economics, the management of the household, real economy embedded in real world. Crematistics, on the other hand, the manipulation of property and wealth so as to maximize short-term monetary exchange value to the owner, i.e. Wall Street and mainstream economics. This is what we have, the gospel of commerce. Chromatistics identified as unnatural. Unnatural. Even by Aristotle. Now, we have to learn some things. And we done ran with this to this day. And don't even understand it. So much suffering in the world, and we think what's going to resolve the suffering are the mechanism that causes it. And you don't know because you don't understand the mechanism. So Bremer says, the economist, he said, "No, man, this black capitalism is not going to work." He says in his brief essay titled "The Trouble with Black Capitalism," which focused on racial desegregation's impact on black business, and after citing how Jim Crow racial segregation contributed to the growth of black-owned service sector businesses, segregation contributed to the growth of their barbershops, beauty shops, hotels, and restaurants, Bremer observed how racial desegregation conversely contributed to the observable decline of the same black-owned enterprises. No, it didn't have nothing to do with racism. It had something to do with competition. So now you had a monopoly over the black consumer base. Now they can go buy from someone else. And the black capitalist was upset because he built his fortunes off the back of working class black people. A lot of black rich people in the South. A lot of them. A lot of black business districts and bank owners. And they had their own clubs and social clubs and everything. But the majority of the black people didn't benefit off that. So this whole black thing is just trash. Hell, because you black, that don't mean a damn thing. You still an enemy. You stand for a whole different class. My grandpappy and great-grandmother and great-grandpappy and great-great-grandpappy, they my grandfather was a sharecropper, being robbed all the time in the South. That's what my grandmother told me. She hated down there being exploited. So when we look at that, what about all them rich black folks? Gurley, who founded Black Wall Street, we got to talk about him too. He knew there was a great migration, and he seized upon the opportunity. The founder of Black Wall Street was an opportunist. And people say that worked. How? You had black prostitutes there, drug use there, you had shanty homes there, you had poor people there. And you had a few rich black people, and they become the face of Black Wall Street when they were the minority. The vast majority of the black people in Black Wall Street wasn't rich. They were being exploited. But who fed us that garbage? Same type of people who began to run on the coattail of Nixon. Bremer noted how large apparel manufacturers were currently producing African motif clothing. Besides seeing a bleak future for black-owned companies in the service industry, Bremer expressed even more doubt about black manufacturing concerns. Why? Because Bremer, as an economist, understood that the black people did not own, even the capitalists or wannabe capitalists of black people, they did not own the means of production. They did not have the raw resources, the ores in the earth. Sure, some of them have farms, but there was a small minority. But your farm didn't mean nothing without the equipment. Talking the turn of the Industrial Revolution. I heard a lady on Clubhouse one time. I'm trying to explain it. Oh, we did have a means of production. You ain't have no damn means of production, lady. But she had to save face because she was the talk of this daggone Clubhouse thing. You know, they little crew. You had black people on less than 1 or 2% of the farmland and of the good farmland. But you need to implement some tools to do stuff. They wasn't manufacturing iron to manufacture plows and eventually tractors. They didn't have the resources for that. And Bremer understood it. Even roughly 100 years after the Civil War, they could not compete with the capitalists who own the means of production, just like they can't compete today. Because it's not a system that will help mankind. It will only help a selective few. That's why there's a war in heaven. That's why Abraham's children have been called. We could trace this crematistic idea beyond Aristotle. Moreover, based on the perceived growing importance of African American consumer market, Bremer urged black businesses or black businessmen not to count on nationally oriented manufacturing firms to leave the Negro market to the Negro entrepreneurs. No, you in a boxing ring, sir. You can't tell them just to box you with one hand. You want to get in the ring, come prepared. And we know we got superior training. We have superior resources. You don't have them. But since you're not saying destroy the system that will remove all these things and inequalities from the merchants of crematistics and to redistribute the resources as King and the rest of the revolutionaries were arguing. No, you say keep the system in place. All right, good. That's what we want to hear. You keep the system in place. Let us do that. Now you climb on in the ring here and watch us knock you all around the place. No, we're not going to use one arm. We're going to use two. You want to tackle, boy, we got the best defense, boy. We coming at you. But you black capitalists act like let me get one up on you. No, that's not how that works. You're a damn fool. Ain't gonna cry racism when they don't. This capitalism, sirs. Capitalists made up that racism stuff that got everybody confused. This capitalism, sir. They're gonna do the same thing to white capitalists. White capitalists gonna crush white capitalists. White capitalists gonna exploit white workers. Black capitalists will crush black capitalists, and black capitalists will exploit black workers. You see the black market of capitalism, you call it the drug trade. You got the pharmaceutical capitalists, they the biggest drug dealers around. They legal though. And they compete against each other in the pharmaceutical industries. But then you got the cartels on the street. There's no cooperation between the two. They fighting for resources. Whether it is marijuana or heroin or Percocets, whatever it is, or the person who is the consumer, the addict, they gonna fight and they kill one another over this stuff. And we don't quite understand the foundations of even the crime in our communities could be traced right back to this madness. So let us wrap up for today's session. Along with issues related to white competition, Bremer's testimony focused on the tenuous financial situation of African American families, the cornerstone of black capitalism's projected consumer market. Your cornerstone is the black families and black people who are already strangled in the stranglehold of this capitalist system. All right? So Bremer argues that Bremer dismissed black capitalism as a cruel hoax and noted that any program aimed at expanding small-scale black-owned business would be running against a strong national trend. That means those who own the means of production, and they have been gathering those resources for the last several hundred years, or 300 to 400 years, several hundred years in the Western Hemisphere, and even longer across the globe. One of the first capitalist industry that made its transition from feudalism to capitalism was Great Britain. All right, you're running against a trend that have been developing for centuries. So this gospel of capitalism must be examined further as we take an analysis of this foundational Black Americans and mercantilism, or this gospel of capitalism. We got to investigate these things. We have to talk more about them, because the new generation must understand what this is about, and us organizing and forming study groups and building Most High Willing, the Nazarene Messianic Party. We find it necessary that we must have an educated group of people who's going to be willing to move and act. But our movement and our activity must be done by thought and intelligence and discipline, and not by a bunch of emotions. And that's going to take training. And we realize that, we have many looking for answers. We have many young, strong that's coming up on the scene. And we have to seize the opportunity. And I appreciate Donald Trump exposing the madness of the Democratic parties, exposing the madness of the Republican parties, and even his own capitalistic practices. People get mad at him. I say, what you mad for? You support capitalism, right? So if you think what he's doing is unjust, understand the science behind it. So, as Martin Luther King said, Jim Crow was an aid to their movement. Jim Crow was a benefit to the movement for a target. And we have an administration that have risen up today that all for the political active people. Now, a whole lot of the masks are coming off, and we could begin to recognize the criminals and then identify their criminal activity. So this is our little session for now. Most High Willing, we're going to continue. I'm Brother Judah from the Congregation of Israel, a representative of the NMP, the Nazarene Messianic Party. And again, I'd like to welcome all of our listeners and thank all of our listeners who have taken the time to listen to us on our podcast, What Is to Be Done. And we'll follow up with more discussions and information as we deal with and investigate geopolitical, historical, biblical, social, and other scientific content. So we hope you tune in with us again on What Is to Be Done. And hopefully we can be edifying and also move a percentage of this audience to act and want to organize. You can reach us with the information that have been appearing on the screen. And with that, I'll say peace and blessings to all of the people who are sincerely searching. And Most High Willing, we will be back again with more discussions. So in the meantime, we say all of you who have an ear, let them hear.